The blood-red sun hung low over Council Bluffs, Iowa, as Beatrice Zimmerman's bruised hands clutched the wooden auction block beneath her. The rough splinters digging into her palms a minor pain compared to the humiliation burning through her veins as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square in the summer of 1876. $20 for the thief. Do I hear 25? The auctioneer's voice crackled through the muggy afternoon air. His finger pointed accusingly at Beatrice, whose once pristine blue dress was now caked with 3 days' worth of jail cell dirt. Her dark blonde hair hung in tangled waves around her face, partially obscuring the purple bruise blossoming on her cheekbone. "She's a pretty one, gentlemen. 6 months of servitude to pay for her crimes against the good people of Council Bluffs. Who'll give me 25? Beatrice's crime had been desperate, not malicious. 1 loaf of bread and a small jar of preserves taken from Mr. Holloway's general store after 3 days without food. She'd lost her position as a schoolteacher when the school board discovered her father's gambling debts. No respectable establishment would hire the daughter of Edmund Zimmerman after he'd fled town, leaving a mountain of unpaid loans behind. $30, called a voice from the back. Beatrice's stomach turned as she recognized Silas Thornton, the saloon owner whose wandering hands and unwanted proposals had been the bane of her existence since her father disappeared. His yellow teeth gleamed as he grinned at her, and she knew what kind of servitude he had in mind. 35, called another voice, this one belonging to Widow Peterson, who needed help with her 5 unruly children. That would be hard labor from dawn till dusk, but at least she'd be safe. 40, Thornton countered, his eyes never leaving Beatrice. $100. The crowd fell silent as a tall figure stepped forward. The sun at his back cast him in shadow, but Beatrice could make out broad shoulders, a straight-backed stance, and the unmistakable silhouette of a cowboy hat. 100, the auctioneer repeated, clearly shocked. For 6 months' servitude? That's what I said, the man replied, his voice deep and steady as he approached the auction block. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone. As he drew closer, Beatrice could see him clearly sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I've got a ranch that needs tending, and she looks capable enough." Silas Thornton spat in the dirt. 105. The cowboy didn't even look at Thornton as he replied, 200, final offer. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the square. Sold to Mr. Jackson Northwood for $200. Beatrice flinched as the sheriff unlocked the shackles around her wrists. She rubbed the raw skin, trying to maintain what little dignity she had left as she stepped down from the auction block. "Come on," the cowboy Mr. Northwood said, not unkindly. He didn't grab her arm as she'd expected, but instead gestured toward a wagon parked at the edge of the square. Beatrice hesitated, glancing around at the dispersing crowd. Some faces showed pity, others disgust. A few, like Thornton's, showed disappointment and anger. Running would be pointless. Where would she go? How would she live? She'd be brought back and her sentence doubled. With no choice but to follow, Beatrice walked beside Northwood toward the wagon. When they reached it, he surprised her by offering his hand to help her climb up. "Thank you," she said stiffly, ignoring his hand and pulling herself onto the wooden seat. Northwood shrugged and climbed up beside her. He clicked his tongue, and the 2 chestnut horses began to move, pulling them away from town. They traveled in silence for several minutes before Beatrice gathered her courage. "Mr. Northwood, Jackson," he interrupted, "or Jack if you prefer." "No need for formalities. Mr. Northwood," she repeated firmly, "I feel I should know what will be expected of me at your ranch." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Cooking, cleaning, helping with the garden, nothing you can't handle, I expect. And nothing else. She couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice, his jaw tightened. I'm not Thornton, he said flatly. You'll know mercy with me, Miss Zimmerman. I need help around the place, not whatever you're thinking. How do you know my name, small town? Word gets around. He flicked the reins gently. I know you were the school teacher until recently. I know about your father, too. Beatrice stiffened. Then you know I'm not actually a thief by nature. I figured as much. He nodded toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set in a blaze of orange and purple. My place is about an hour out. We'll be there before dark. As the wagon rattled along the dusty road leading out of Council Bluffs, Beatrice tried to make sense of her situation. 6 months, bound in service to this stranger, this cowboy who'd outbid Thornton and the widow. His words suggested safety, but experience had taught her that men's words and actions often diverged. The land around them gradually changed from flat prairie to rolling hills dotted with cottonwood trees. The evening brought a cool breeze that provided some relief from the summer heat. In the distance, a creek winked silver in the fading light. That's Willow Creek, Jackson said, following her gaze. It runs through my property, never runs dry, even in the worst summers. How large is your ranch? Beatrice asked, attempting politeness despite her circumstances. 800 acres, modest compared to some, but it's good land, plenty of grass for the cattle and horses. And you manage it alone. I have a hand who helps with the livestock, Miguel Ramirez. Good man. But he's got his own place a few miles down, so he's not around all the time. My sister Clara comes by when she can, but she's got 3 children and a husband to look after in town. Beatrice nodded, filing away this information. If there was another worker and a sister who visited, perhaps this situation wasn't as dangerous as she'd feared. Still, she remained wary. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they crested a hill, and Jackson's ranch came into view. A 2-story farmhouse stood surrounded by several outbuildings, a barn, a stable, what looked like a smokehouse, and a chicken coop. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed in fenced pastures. Home, Jackson said simply as they approached. The house was larger than Beatrice had expected, painted white with green shutters. A wide porch wrapped around the front, complete with a swing and several rocking chairs. Flowers bloomed in boxes beneath the windows, and a large vegetable garden stretched to one side. Jackson brought the wagon to a halt near the house and jumped down. This time, Beatrice accepted his offered hand, her legs stiff from the ride. I'll show you around tomorrow, he said. For now, you probably want to rest and clean up. He gestured toward the house. There's a room prepared for you upstairs. Beatrice followed him up the porch steps and through the front door into a comfortable sitting room. Simple but well-made furniture filled the space, a sofa covered in green fabric, a rocking chair by the fire, bookshelves lining one wall. Kitchen's through there, Jackson said, pointing. Dining room beside it. My room's down here, yours is upstairs, second door on the left, washrooms at the end of the hall. Clara left some of her old dresses in the wardrobe for you. Beatrice stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure what to say. Thank you seemed inappropriate given that she was essentially his prisoner, yet he was being unexpectedly considerate. I'll bring your things up, he said, turning back toward the door. I don't have any things, she reminded him. I wasn't exactly allowed to pack before being thrown in jail. Jackson paused, his expression softening slightly. Right. Well, Clara left plenty. Make yourself at home. I'll be back shortly with some supper. After he left, Beatrice climbed the stairs slowly, her body aching from the tension of the day. The room he'd indicated was simple but pleasant: a double bed with a quilt, a wardrobe, a small desk by the window, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher. She opened the wardrobe to find several dresses, all simple but well made and in good condition. She selected a blue one that looked close to her size and laid it on the bed. Pouring water from the pitcher into the basin, she washed her face and hands, wincing as the cool water stung her various cuts and bruises. She untangled her hair as best she could with her fingers, then changed into the clean dress, feeling slightly more human. When she descended the stairs, she found Jackson in the kitchen, setting out bread, cheese, and cold meat on 2 plates. "Nothing fancy tonight," he said. "We'll have a proper breakfast in the morning." They ate in near silence at the kitchen table. Beatrice was ravenous, having had nothing but jail rations for days, but she forced herself to eat slowly and with dignity. "How long have you had this ranch?" she asked eventually, unable to bear the silence any longer. 5 years, Jackson replied. "Bought it from an old-timer who was moving east to live with his daughter. Been improving it ever since." "It's nice," she offered, surprising herself with the sincerity in her voice. "Thanks. It's a good piece of land." He studied her for a moment. "You should know I meant what I said in town. I expect work from you, but you'll be treated fairly here. Better than in that jail cell, anyway." Beatrice set down her fork. "Mr. Northwood, Jackson," he corrected again. "Why did you buy my contract? Surely a hired girl would have been cheaper and less complicated." He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "I don't like injustice," he said finally, "and selling a woman for stealing food when she's hungry strikes me as unjust. So this was charity." The word tasted bitter on her tongue. "Call it what you want. I needed help around here, and you needed to not be bought by Thornton. Seemed simple enough to me." Before she could respond, he stood and gathered their plates. "You should get some rest. Mornings start early here." That night, alone in the unfamiliar bedroom, Beatrice lay awake listening to the sounds of the prairie, the chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant lowing of cattle. Her situation was precarious, dependent entirely on the goodwill of a man she'd just met. Yet as she finally drifted toward sleep, she couldn't help but think that, for the first time since her father disappeared, she might have found a measure of safety. Dawn arrived with the crowing of roosters and golden light streaming through the curtains. Beatrice dressed quickly in another of Clara's dresses, this one a practical brown with white trim, and made her way downstairs to find Jackson already at the stove, frying bacon. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's hot if you want some. Cups in the cabinet to your right." "Thank you," she murmured, pouring herself a cup. The rich aroma made her realize how long it had been since she'd had proper coffee. "Can I help with breakfast? You can scramble some eggs if you like. Basket on the counter there has fresh ones from the coop." They worked side by side in companionable silence, and soon they were seated at the table with plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits that Jackson had already baked. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a cook," he admitted as they ate. "Been making do with simple fare." "If you've got any skill in that area, it would be appreciated." "I can cook," Beatrice said. "My mother taught me before she died. Nothing fancy but good, solid meals." Jackson nodded, looking pleased. "After breakfast, I'll show you around and we can discuss your duties." The tour of the ranch was comprehensive. Jackson showed her the chicken coop where she'd gather eggs each morning, the vegetable garden that needed weeding and harvesting, the smokehouse where meat was preserved, and the root cellar stocked with supplies for winter. "The barn and corrals are my domain," he explained as they walked. "Miguel and I handle the livestock. Your responsibilities will be mostly to the house, garden, and chickens." Beatrice listened carefully, mentally cataloging the tasks that would fill her days for the next 6 months. It was work, to be sure, but nothing unreasonable. "What about laundry?" she asked practically. "Wash day is Monday," he replied. "There's a copper boiler in the shed out back and a clothesline between those 2 posts." He pointed to a space behind the house. "Clara usually helps when she comes, but I expect you can manage." By mid-morning, they'd completed the tour, and Beatrice had a clear understanding of what was expected of her. It was a far cry from teaching school, but also far better than what might have awaited her with Silas Thornton. "I need to check on the north pasture," Jackson said. "Will you be all right here alone? You could start with the garden if you're willing." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "The garden looks like it needs attention." He nodded, seeming satisfied with her response. "I'll be back for lunch." Alone in the garden, Beatrice found a certain peace in the physical labor of weeding between rows of carrots, beans, and potatoes. The sun was warm but not yet scorching, and birds sang in the nearby trees. For a woman who had faced the auction block just yesterday, the simple act of tending growing things felt remarkably like freedom. Around noon, she heard hoofbeats approaching and looked up to see Jackson returning on a tall black horse. He dismounted gracefully and led the animal to the water trough before approaching her. "You've made good progress," he observed, looking at the neat rows she'd weeded. "The garden was well planned," she replied. "It just needed some attention." "That's Clara's doing. She has a knack for growing things." He gestured toward the house. "Let's get some lunch. Afterward, I can show you where everything is in the kitchen if you want to take over the cooking." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Beatrice rose early to gather eggs and prepare breakfast. After eating, Jackson would head out to work the ranch while she attended to household chores, cleaning, cooking, mending clothes that needed repair. In the late afternoons, she tended the garden, harvesting vegetables for dinner and preserving the excess for winter. Jackson was gone most days until supper time, returning tired and often dusty from his work. They would eat together, their conversation gradually becoming more comfortable as they learned about each other. He never treated her like a servant, always thanking her for meals and occasionally complimenting her cooking or the tidiness of the house. On the 5th day, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Beatrice finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why don't you have a wife to do all this?" she asked, gesturing vaguely toward the house. "A man with a ranch like this usually has a family." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I was engaged once," he said finally. "Emma was her name. She died of typhoid 3 years ago, just before our wedding." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly, feeling a pang of sympathy. He shrugged, the movement stiff. "Life out here is hard. People die. You move on." But the tightness around his eyes belied his casual words. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked. "Because Emma would have wanted you to." A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe partly. Emma had a strong sense of justice. But mostly I just couldn't stomach the idea of you ending up with Thornton. I've seen how he treats the girls at his saloon." Beatrice shuddered, remembering Thornton's hungry eyes at the auction. "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful." Jackson glanced at her, his gray eyes softening in the fading light. "You're earning your keep, Miss Zimmerman. No need for gratitude." "Beatrice," she corrected gently. "If I'm to call you Jackson, you should use my given name." He nodded, and they fell into a comfortable silence as darkness settled over the prairie. The weeks passed, and summer began to give way to early autumn. The days grew shorter, the mornings cooler. Beatrice found herself settling into life at the ranch with surprising ease. Her room became personalized with small touches, wildflowers in a jar on the desk, a patchwork cushion she'd made from fabric scraps for the rocking chair, books borrowed from Jackson's shelves stacked by the bed. She came to know the rhythms of ranch life, the excitement of cattle sales, the hard work of harvest, the satisfaction of a well-stocked pantry. She met Miguel Ramirez, the ranch hand who helped Jackson with the livestock, and found him to be a kind, hard-working man with a quick smile and stories of his homeland in Mexico. Clara Northwood Palmer visited one Sunday in late September, bringing her 3 children, twins boys of about 8 and a girl of 5. She was a feminine version of her brother, with the same storm gray eyes and direct manner, but with a warmth that Jackson sometimes lacked. "So you're the school teacher Jack rescued," Clara said after introductions were made, her eyes taking in Beatrice's appearance with frank curiosity. "I was a school teacher," Beatrice corrected. "Now I'm not entirely sure what I am." Clara laughed, a rich sound that reminded Beatrice of Jackson's rare chuckles. "You're the woman who's finally made my brother's house a home," she said, gesturing around the sitting room, which Beatrice had indeed transformed with small touches, curtains she'd sewn from fabric found in a trunk, cushions restuffed and recovered, surfaces polished to a shine. "I'm just doing what's expected," Beatrice said, uncomfortable with the praise. Clara's expression softened. "Jack told me what happened in town. It wasn't right what they did to you." "Perhaps not," Beatrice agreed cautiously, "but I did steal from Mr. Holloway a loaf of bread and some preserves because you were starving. That's hardly a hanging offense." Clara's indignation was clear. "The town council has become increasingly unreasonable since Judge Wilson's son took over as mayor. They forget that most of us were struggling when we first settled here." The conversation shifted as the children demanded attention, but throughout the day, Beatrice noticed Clara watching her interactions with Jackson with obvious interest. As the family prepared to leave in the late afternoon, Clara pulled Beatrice aside while Jackson helped the children into their wagon. "He's different with you here," Clara said quietly. "More at ease. I haven't seen him like this since Emma died." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure you're mistaken. We have a business arrangement, nothing more." Clara's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. "My brother is a good man, Beatrice. One of the best, but he's been lonely for a long time." Before Beatrice could respond, Jackson approached and Clara embraced him warmly. "Don't be a stranger, Jack. Bring Beatrice to Sunday dinner next week." After they left, a strange awkwardness hung between Beatrice and Jackson as they prepared supper together. She was acutely aware of Clara's words and wondered if Jackson's sister had made similar comments to him. "Your family is lovely," she said finally, breaking the silence as she chopped carrots for a stew. "Clara's always been the heart of the family," Jackson replied, his knife making quick work of a potato. "Especially after our parents died." "How old were you?" "I was 17, Clara 15. We managed to keep the family farm until she married Thomas 3 years later. Then I headed west, worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to buy this place." "You've done well for yourself," Beatrice observed, looking around the comfortable kitchen. Jackson's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "We get by." That evening, as they sat by the fire in the sitting room, Jackson reading a newspaper, Beatrice mending a shirt, she found herself watching him surreptitiously. The firelight cast his features in warm relief, softening the usual severity of his expression. She could see why Emma had loved him. Behind his reserved exterior was a man of principle and quiet strength. The thought startled her. When had she begun thinking of Jackson in such terms? He was her employer, her jailer in a sense, even if a benevolent one. She had no business noticing the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, or how his hands, strong and capable from years of ranch work, could be surprisingly gentle when treating an injured animal or helping her down from the wagon. She turned her attention resolutely back to her mending, but found herself uncomfortably aware of his presence across the room for the remainder of the evening. October brought cooler weather and preparation for winter. Beatrice spent days preserving the last of the garden's bounty, canning vegetables, drying herbs, storing squash and potatoes in the root cellar. Jackson and Miguel were busy with the cattle, selecting which to sell before winter and which to keep for breeding. One crisp morning, Beatrice was hanging laundry on the line when she heard a wagon approaching. Expecting Clara, she was surprised to see a different vehicle coming up the drive, this one driven by a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. Beside him sat Silas Thornton. Dread pooled in her stomach as she hurried toward the house, hoping to find Jackson. Before she could reach the porch, the wagon pulled up and Thornton called out to her. "Well, if it isn't the thief, looking mighty comfortable." Beatrice stiffened, forcing herself to face the men. "Mr. Thornton, what brings you to the Northwood Ranch?" The well-dressed man climbed down from the wagon. "Miss Zimmerman, I presume. I'm Mayor Wilson. I've come on official business." "Jackson isn't here," she said. "He's out checking the herd with Miguel." "It's you we've come to see, actually," Mayor Wilson said, his tone falsely pleasant. "There seems to have been some irregularity with your sentencing." Thornton's smug expression sent a chill through her. "What kind of irregularity?" "According to town ordinance, a person sentenced to servitude for theft must serve their time within town limits, where their rehabilitation can be properly monitored," Wilson explained, withdrawing a paper from his coat. "Mr. Northwood's ranch is outside our jurisdiction. I'm afraid you'll need to be reassigned." "Let me guess," Beatrice said coldly, "to Mr. Thornton." "He has graciously offered to take over your contract," Wilson confirmed. "His establishment is within town limits and will allow for proper supervision." "This is absurd," Beatrice protested. "I've served nearly 2 months of my sentence here without incident. Nevertheless, the law is the law. Gather your things, Miss Zimmerman. You're coming back to town with us." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the confrontation. All three turned to see Jackson riding toward them at a gallop, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene. He dismounted in one fluid motion, positioning himself between Beatrice and the visitors. "Wilson, Thornton." His greeting was curt. "What's this about?" Mayor Wilson repeated his explanation about the ordinance, but Jackson's expression only darkened. "That's convenient," he said when Wilson finished. "Especially since that ordinance wasn't mentioned at the auction. And I notice you're only enforcing it now that harvest is done and winter's coming when Thornton needs extra help at his saloon." Wilson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Regardless, the law show me this law," Jackson interrupted, holding out his hand for the paper Wilson clutched. After studying it for a moment, Jackson handed it back with a disgusted snort. "This ordinance is dated last week, Wilson. You can't retroactively apply a new law to a sentence that's already being served." "Now see here, Northwood," Thornton began, but Jackson cut him off. "No, you see here. I paid $200 for Miss Zimmerman's contract. That was a legal transaction witnessed by half the town. If you want to change the terms now, you'll need to take it to the circuit judge when he comes through next month." "The town council has authority," Wilson tried again. "The town council has authority within town limits," Jackson countered. "As you just pointed out, my ranch is outside your jurisdiction. That means your new ordinance doesn't apply here at all." Beatrice watched the exchange with growing admiration. Jackson's logic was impeccable, and she could see Wilson realizing he was outmatched. "This isn't over, Northwood," Thornton growled. "That woman is a convicted thief. She belongs where she can be properly supervised. She's being properly supervised, Jackson replied, his voice dangerously quiet. And she's not just that woman. Her name is Beatrice Zimmerman, and she's under my protection. Remember that before you try something like this again. The intensity in his voice sent a warm shock through Beatrice's body. No one had defended her like this since her father, and even he, with his gambling and drinking, had been an unreliable protector at best. Mayor Wilson, sensing defeat, tugged at Thornton's arm. "We'll discuss this further with the council, Mr. Northwood. Good day to you both." As they climbed back into their wagon, Thornton shot Beatrice a look of such malevolence that she instinctively stepped closer to Jackson. Only when the wagon disappeared down the road did she realize she was trembling. "They'll be back," she said softly. Jackson nodded, his jaw tight. "Probably." Thornton doesn't give up easily when he wants something. He turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thanks to you." She met his eyes directly. "You didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did." His voice was firm. "What they're trying to do is wrong. And besides," he added, his mouth quirking into a rare, full smile, "I'd be lost without your cooking." The tension broken, Beatrice laughed. "Is that all I am to you, a cook?" "And a fine gardener," he teased, his eyes warm as they met hers, "and decent company on cold evenings." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, that what had begun as a business arrangement had become something more. Neither spoke of it directly, but that evening by the fire, Jackson sat beside her on the sofa rather than in his usual chair, and when their hands accidentally touched as they both reached for the teapot, neither pulled away immediately. November brought the first snow, transforming the prairie into a glittering white expanse. Life on the ranch slowed as winter took hold. The cattle required less attention now that they were mostly confined to the home pastures and fed with hay stored in the barn. Jackson spent more time in the house, repairing equipment, keeping accounts, and reading by the fire. Beatrice found herself enjoying these quiet days. She baked bread, quilted a new bed cover for her room, and read through Jackson's collection of books. In the evenings, they sometimes played checkers or cards, or simply sat in companionable silence by the fire. One such evening, as sleet tapped against the windows and the wind howled around the eaves, Jackson cleared his throat in a way that suggested he had something important to say. "I've been thinking," he began, setting aside the harness he was mending. Beatrice looked up from her book. "About what?" "Your sentence will be up in another 4 months." Her heart sank unexpectedly at the reminder. "Yes, I suppose it will. Have you thought about what you'll do afterward?" She closed her book, keeping her finger between the pages to mark her place. "Not specifically. I'm not sure I can return to Council Bluffs, given recent events. Perhaps I could find a teaching position in another town." Jackson nodded, his expression unreadable. "That would be a sensible plan." "Do you?" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Do you want me to leave when my sentence is complete?" He looked startled. "I didn't say that, but you're bringing it up now." Jackson set the harness aside completely and turned to face her. "I'm bringing it up because I want you to stay, Beatrice. Not as a servant working off a sentence, but well, as whatever you want to be." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I mean I've grown accustomed to having you here, more than accustomed. I look forward to coming home and finding you in the house. I like talking with you in the evenings. I like the way you hum when you're cooking and the sound of your laugh when something amuses you." Beatrice felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Jackson, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this started under unusual circumstances. I know you had no choice but to come here, but I hope you might choose to stay now that you've seen what life here can be like. As what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your housekeeper. Jackson met her eyes directly. No, as my wife, if you could ever consider such a thing. The book slipped from Beatrice's fingers and fell to the floor with a thud. Of all the things she had expected him to say, this hadn't even been a possibility in her mind. Your wife, she repeated, certain she had misheard. Yes. His voice was steady, though she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. I realize this may seem sudden, or perhaps inappropriate given our current arrangement. If you need time to consider, or if you wish to decline entirely, I'll understand. Nothing would change regarding your sentence or your place here until it's completed. Beatrice stared at him, her mind racing. Marriage to Jackson. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. She had come to admire him deeply over the past months, his quiet strength, his sense of justice, his gentle treatment of her despite having every right to treat her as a servant. But marriage was a tremendous step. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. You don't have to say anything right now, he assured her. Like I said, you can take time to think about it. She nodded, grateful for his understanding. I will think about it, seriously. That night, sleep eluded Beatrice as she turned Jackson's proposal over in her mind. Marriage would mean security, a home, a respectable place in society again. But was that enough reason to accept? Her parents had married for love, and despite their financial struggles, she had witnessed the deep bond between them. Did she love Jackson? The question made her heart beat faster. She certainly cared for him, respected him, enjoyed his company. When he smiled, something inside her warmed. When their hands touched accidentally, she felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nerves. Was that love? Or just gratitude to the man who had saved her from a much worse fate? Morning came without answers, but as she went about her usual tasks, feeding the chickens, preparing breakfast, sweeping the floor, Beatrice found herself noticing small details of the house with new eyes. This could be her home permanently, not just for the duration of her sentence. These routines could be her life, not an obligation but a choice. When Jackson came in for breakfast, neither mentioned his proposal directly, but a new awareness hummed between them like electricity in the air before a storm. I need to ride into town today, he said as they ate. We're low on coffee and flour. Is there anything you need? Some thread, if you don't mind, she replied. The blue spool is almost empty and I have mending to do. Blue thread. I'll remember. He hesitated, then added, Clara asked if we might come for dinner tomorrow. I told her I'd check with you. Beatrice smiled. I'd like that. It's been a while since we've seen her and the children. After Jackson left for town, Beatrice found herself humming as she kneaded dough for bread. The simple domestic task felt different, somehow more meaningful, as if she were shaping not just bread but her future. The sound of approaching horses interrupted her thoughts. Looking out the window, her heart sank as she recognized Silas Thornton, accompanied by two rough-looking men she didn't know. This time, the mayor was noticeably absent. Taking a deep breath, she wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. Before opening it, she retrieved Jackson's spare pistol from the drawer where he kept it. She had never fired a gun, but they didn't need to know that. Mr. Thornton, she called through the door. Jackson isn't here. He's gone to town. Open up, Miss Zimmerman, Thornton replied. We have business with you, not Northwood. I have no business with you. Please leave. There was a muttered conversation outside, then Thornton's voice again, harder now. Either you open this door or we break it down. Your choice. Beatrice's hand tightened on the pistol. I'm armed, Mr. Thornton, and I will defend myself if necessary. A laugh. You expect me to believe that. You're a school teacher, not a gunslinger. Believe what you want. The fact remains that if you break down this door, I'll consider it a threat to my safety and act accordingly." Another murmured conversation, then the sound of footsteps moving away from the door. Beatrice breathed a sigh of relief, thinking they had given up, but a crash from the kitchen sent her heart racing again. They were trying to enter through the back door. Moving swiftly, she positioned herself where she could see both entrances, the pistol held steadily before her. The back door splintered as one of Thornton's men kicked it in, and he stepped into the kitchen with a triumphant grin that froze when he saw the gun pointed at his chest. "I warned you," Beatrice said, her voice remarkably calm despite her racing heart. "Now, Miss Zimmerman," Thornton said, appearing behind his companion, "let's be reasonable. The mayor says your contract was improperly assigned. We're just here to correct that oversight." "The mayor isn't here," she pointed out, "and neither is any legal document authorizing you to remove me from this property. What you're doing is kidnapping, Mr. Thornton, and I doubt even Mayor Wilson would support that." Thornton's expression darkened. "You're awful confident for a woman facing 3 men alone." "She's not alone." The voice came from behind Thornton, and Beatrice nearly sagged with relief as Miguel Ramirez stepped into view, his rifle trained on the intruders. "I suggest you gentlemen leave," Miguel continued calmly, "before this becomes messier than it needs to be." Thornton's face contorted with fury, but even he wasn't foolish enough to challenge an armed man. "This isn't over," he spat as he backed toward the door. "Northwood won't always be around to protect his little thief." "Yet he is now," came Jackson's voice as he appeared in the doorway, his own gun drawn. His expression was coldly furious as he took in the broken door and the scene before him. "Northwood," Thornton acknowledged, his bravado faltering slightly. "We were just having a discussion with Miss Zimmerman about her legal status. By breaking into my home," Jackson's voice was dangerously quiet. "That's not a discussion, Thornton. That's a crime." The law says nothing about breaking down doors and threatening women," Jackson interrupted. "Now get off my property before I forget my civilized upbringing." Thornton and his men retreated, but not before Thornton shot Beatrice a look of pure hatred. "You'll regret this, both of you." Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded did Beatrice lower the pistol, her hands suddenly shaking. Jackson crossed to her immediately, taking the gun gently from her grasp. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. She nodded, though her knees felt weak. "Thanks to Miguel. He arrived just in time." Jackson turned to his ranch hand with gratitude. "Perfect timing." "What brought you by?" Miguel smiled. "Clara sent me with a pie for Miss Beatrice. Said something about fattening her up before winter truly sets in." "I was nearly here when I saw Thornton and his men approaching." "Thank God for Clara and her pies," Jackson said with feeling. He turned back to Beatrice, his expression grave. "This has gone too far. Thornton is becoming dangerous." "What can we do?" she asked, "if the mayor is supporting him?" Jackson's jaw set in determination. "We're riding to town tomorrow. All of us, you, me, Miguel, Clara, and her family too. We're going to have this out once and for all in front of the whole town if necessary." That night, as Beatrice lay in bed trying to sleep, she replayed the day's events in her mind. The fear when Thornton appeared, the surge of courage that had allowed her to face him down, the overwhelming relief when Jackson returned. And beneath it all, Jackson's proposal still lingered, taking on new significance after the confrontation. She realized with sudden clarity that the thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Jackson, was more frightening than facing down Thornton and his men had been. Somewhere along the way, this place had become home, and Jackson had become essential. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the snow glittering in the early light. Beatrice dressed with special care in the nicest of Clara's hand-me-downs, a deep green dress that brought out the gold in her hair. She pinned it up neatly, studying her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The frightened, bedraggled woman from the auction block was gone, replaced by someone with clear eyes and a determined set to her jaw. When she descended the stairs, she found Jackson waiting in the sitting room, similarly dressed in his best clothes, a clean shirt, dark trousers, and a vest she'd never seen before. He looked up as she entered, and the admiration in his eyes made her cheeks warm. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." She smoothed her skirts. "Are we really doing this? Confronting the mayor and Thornton in town?" Jackson nodded. "It's time to end this. Thornton won't stop until he's forced to, and I won't have you living in fear." He hesitated, then added softly, "Not when I hope you might consider making your life here permanent." Beatrice took a deep breath. "About that, your proposal." His expression grew carefully neutral. "Yes, I've been thinking about it a lot." She met his eyes directly. "Before I give you my answer, I need to know something. Is this about protecting me from Thornton? About making sure I have somewhere safe to go when my sentence is complete?" Jackson's brow furrowed. "That's part of it, yes. I do want to protect you. But if that were all, I could simply offer you employment here. A marriage proposal is." He paused, searching for words. "It's more than protection, Beatrice. It's because I've come to care for you, deeply. And if circumstances had been different, if we had met under normal conditions, would you still want to marry me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Though I might have courted you properly first, taken you to town dances, brought you flowers, all the things a man does when he's trying to win a woman's heart." A smile touched his lips. "Instead, I bought you at auction and put you to work in my kitchen. Not the most romantic beginning." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Beatrice laughed. "No, not very romantic, but perhaps more revealing of character than a dozen dances could be." "And what has it revealed about my character?" he asked, his voice low. "That you're a good man, Jackson Northwood, a man of principle and compassion, a man who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult." She took a step closer to him. "A man I could love given time." Hope flared in his eyes. "Does that mean?" "It means yes," she said softly. "Yes, I'll marry you, not out of gratitude or necessity, but because I want to build a life here, with you." Joy transformed his face, erasing the usual seriousness and making him look younger, almost boyish. "Beatrice," he breathed, reaching for her hands. She gave them willingly, her heart light despite the confrontation that lay ahead. "When this is over, when Thornton is no longer a threat, we can begin properly. But for now, knowing we face this together as equals is enough." Jackson raised her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "More than equals, partners." The words settled around her like a promise, warm and secure. Whatever happened in town today, she would no longer face it alone. The journey to Council Bluffs took just over an hour, with Jackson and Beatrice in their wagon and Miguel riding alongside. They met Clara, Thomas, and the children at the edge of town, where Jackson briefly explained the situation. "That weasel Thornton," Clara fumed, "and Wilson enabling him. It's disgraceful." "Which is why we're addressing it publicly," Jackson replied. "Where's everyone gathering today?" "Church just let out," Thomas said. "Most folks will be heading to the hotel dining room or the cafe for Sunday dinner." "Perfect," Jackson nodded. "The cafe, then." Thornton will be at his saloon, but Wilson takes his Sunday dinner at the cafe with his wife. They made their way through town, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Beatrice held her head high, though her stomach churned with anxiety. The last time she'd walked these streets, it had been as a prisoner headed for the auction block. The cafe was indeed crowded when they arrived, with nearly every table filled. Mayor Wilson sat near the window with his wife, while several members of the town council occupied nearby tables. A hush fell over the room as Jackson's group entered, and Beatrice felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. "Afternoon, neighbors," Jackson said loudly, his voice carrying to every corner. "I apologize for interrupting your meals, but there's a matter that concerns this whole community, and it needs addressing." Mayor Wilson rose, his expression wary. "Mr. Northwood, Miss Zimmerman, what brings you to town on this fine Sunday, Justice?" Jackson replied simply. "Or rather, the lack of it." He turned to address the room at large. "Yesterday, Silas Thornton and two hired thugs broke into my home and attempted to kidnap Miss Zimmerman, claiming some new town ordinance gave him the right to take over her contract." Murmurs spread through the cafe. Wilson's face reddened. "Now see here, Northwood." "No, you see here," Jackson interrupted. "Miss Zimmerman was sentenced by this town for stealing food when she was starving. I paid for her contract, fair and square, at a public auction that you yourself oversaw, Mayor. Now, suddenly, there's a new ordinance, conveniently benefiting a man who's made no secret of his inappropriate interest in her. The ordinance was passed legally by the town council," Wilson insisted, though he looked uncomfortable. "Was it?" Clara stepped forward. "Because my husband sits on that council, and he says no such ordinance was ever brought to a vote." All eyes turned to Thomas, who nodded confirmation. "First I heard of it was yesterday when Clara told me what happened at the ranch." Wilson's wife tugged at his sleeve, her expression mortified. "Herbert, what have you done?" Before Wilson could respond, the cafe door opened and Silas Thornton himself entered, stopping short when he saw the gathering. "Well, well," he drawled, recovering quickly. "Looks like the whole Northwood clan is in town, and the thief too." "That's enough, Thornton," Jackson said coldly. "We're here to settle this once and for all." "Nothing to settle," Thornton shrugged. "The mayor signed the papers transferring her contract to me. It's all legal and proper." "Except it's not," came a new voice. Mrs. Holloway, the storekeeper's wife, rose from her table. "My husband isn't here, but I know he'd want me to speak up. Beatrice Zimmerman took food from our store because she was desperate, not because she's a thief by nature. We pressed charges because the law required it, but we never intended for her to be sold like property." Beatrice stared at Mrs. Holloway in surprise. The woman had never spoken to her during her brief time teaching at the school. "Furthermore," Mrs. Holloway continued, warming to her subject, "my husband would be appalled to learn that Mayor Wilson is using his position to help Thornton acquire a woman who has clearly refused his advances. That's not justice. That's abuse of power." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cafe. Wilson looked increasingly uncomfortable as more townsfolk spoke up, questioning the mysterious ordinance and expressing disgust at Thornton's behavior. "Seems to me," said old Mr. Jenkins from his corner table, "that if Miss Zimmerman stole to eat, the real crime is that none of us offered her help when her father left her destitute. We were quick to judge, but slow to show Christian charity." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected support. Jackson's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Mayor Wilson, seeing the tide of public opinion turning, cleared his throat. "Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding about the ordinance." "I'll review the paperwork. There is no ordinance, is there, Herbert?" Mrs. Wilson asked sharply. "You simply wrote up something official looking to help Silas because he contributed to your re-election campaign." Wilson's guilty expression confirmed her accusation. The room erupted in angry voices, with several council members demanding explanations and others expressing outrage. Thornton, seeing his scheme unraveling, turned his anger on Beatrice. "This is your doing, you conniving, that's enough." Jackson stepped between them, his expression thunderous. Miss Zimmerman has fulfilled half her sentence with honor and dignity. She's worked hard and proven herself to be an asset to my household. In fact, he turned to address the room, I've asked her to marry me, and she's accepted. A stunned silence fell, followed by a buzz of surprise. Clara's delighted exclamation rose above the noise, and several women immediately approached Beatrice with congratulations. Marry her, Thornton spat. She's a convicted thief. And I'm a man who recognizes worth beyond past mistakes, Jackson replied evenly. More importantly, I love her and she loves me, which is more than you can say about your interest in her, Thornton. Love. He'd said it publicly, without hesitation. Beatrice's heart swelled as she realized the truth of his words. They did love each other, though neither had used the word before this moment. Mrs. Holloway approached, taking Beatrice's free hand. I believe this calls for a celebration, not a confrontation. Mayor Wilson, she turned to address him. I move that the remainder of Miss Zimmerman's sentence be commuted in light of these circumstances. Surely a woman about to become a respectable rancher's wife has been sufficiently rehabilitated. Wilson, eager to salvage something from the debacle, seized the opportunity. I think that's a fine suggestion. All in favor, a chorus of agreement rose from around the room. Even those who had been skeptical seemed moved by the unexpected love story unfolding before them. Then it's settled, Wilson declared with all the authority he could muster. Miss Zimmerman's sentence is commuted, effective immediately, and congratulations on your engagement. Thornton stormed out, muttering threats that no one paid attention to. The mood in the café transformed from tense confrontation to impromptu celebration, as townsfolk approached to offer congratulations and, in some cases, apologies to Beatrice for their earlier judgment. Well, Clara said, appearing at Beatrice's side with a broad smile. This isn't quite how I expected today to unfold, but I can't say I'm displeased with the outcome. Welcome to the family officially. Beatrice laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Thank you. I'm still trying to take it all in. You've been family in all but name for weeks now, Clara replied. Anyone with eyes could see how Jack feels about you, and how you feel about him, though you both took your time admitting it. Jackson, overhearing, put his arm around Beatrice's waist. Some things are worth taking time over, he said, his eyes warm as they met hers. The ride back to the ranch that evening was filled with a sense of promise that made the winter landscape seem less harsh. Beatrice sat close to Jackson on the wagon seat, their shoulders touching as the horses pulled them steadily homeward. So, he said after a comfortable silence, a free woman now and still choosing to come back to the ranch with me. Did you doubt I would? She asked, smiling up at him. Not really, he admitted, but it's good to know for certain that you're staying because you want to, not because a contract requires it. I want to, she assured him. I want to build a life with you, Jackson, a real one with all its joys and challenges. He smiled, the rare, full smile that transformed his face and made her heart skip. When should we make it official? The wedding, I mean. Spring would be lovely, she mused. When the wildflowers are blooming. Spring it is, he agreed. Though that's a long engagement, Beatrice laughed. We've done everything backwards so far living together before marriage, getting engaged in front of the whole town without you ever actually proposing privately. A long engagement seems positively conventional by comparison. Jackson chuckled, the sound warming her despite the chill air. Fair point. Still, I look forward to the day when I can call you my wife. And I my husband, she said softly. As the ranch came into view, golden light spilling from the windows into the gathering dusk, Beatrice reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair on that auction block to this moment of perfect contentment beside the man, she loved a man who had seen her value when others saw only her mistakes. They had a future to build together now. A home, a family perhaps, seasons of work and rest on this land that had become her own. Whatever challenges came, they would face them side by side, partners in all things. "Home," Jackson said simply as they approached the house. Beatrice squeezed his hand. "Yes, home." Spring arrived in a riot of green, transforming the prairie from its winter slumber into a vibrant tapestry of life. Wildflowers dotted the rolling hills, birds returned to build nests, and the creek ran full and clear with snowmelt. On a perfect May morning, with the sun shining from a cloudless sky, Beatrice stood in the bedroom that had been hers alone these past months, Clara helping her with the buttons of her wedding dress, a creation of ivory satin, and lace that they had worked on together through the winter evenings. "You look beautiful," Clara said, her eyes misty as she stepped back to admire the finished effect. "Jack won't know what hit him." Beatrice smiled, touching the small cluster of wildflowers pinned in her upswept hair. "I can hardly believe this day is finally here." "Nervous?" Clara asked, adjusting the fall of the skirt. "A little," Beatrice admitted, "but mostly just happy, deeply, completely happy." Outside, the ranch was transformed. Lanterns hung from the trees surrounding the yard. Tables had been set up for the feast to follow the ceremony, and flowers decorated every available surface. Half of Council Bluffs seemed to be in attendance, the mood of the town having shifted dramatically toward Beatrice since that confrontational Sunday at the cafe. Even Mr. and Mrs. Holloway had become friends, frequently inviting Beatrice and Jackson to dinner when they came to town. Mayor Wilson had apologized publicly for his role in Thornton's scheme, and though Thornton himself had never reconciled with them, he had at least ceased his harassment, especially after losing his saloon in a poker game and moving west to try his luck elsewhere. A knock at the door announced Thomas, Clara's husband. "Ladies, the circuit preacher is ready, and so is the groom. Quite impatient, in fact," Clara laughed. "Tell my brother his bride will be down when she's good and ready, and not a moment sooner." But Beatrice was ready, more than ready. "Let's not keep him waiting," she said, gathering her bouquet of spring wildflowers. Clara led the way downstairs and out to the yard, where chairs had been arranged facing an arch twined with greenery and early roses. Jackson stood waiting beneath it, more handsome than Beatrice had ever seen him in a new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. His face as she walked toward him, escorted by Thomas in the absence of her own father, was everything she could have hoped for. Wonder, love, and a touch of awe transformed his features as their eyes met across the space between them. The ceremony itself was a blur of emotions and sacred words. They had written their own vows, simple promises of love, faithfulness, and partnership that brought tears to many eyes among the guests. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson's kiss was tender yet filled with promise, a perfect balance of public propriety and private passion that made Beatrice's heart race. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and drink flowing freely, music from a small band of local musicians, and dancing under the stars as lanterns cast a golden glow over the gathering. Beatrice found herself passed from partner to partner as everyone wanted to dance with the bride, but she always returned to Jackson, drawn to him like a compass finding north. "Happy, Mrs. Northwood?" he asked during a quiet moment when they'd managed to slip away to the porch steps. "Impossibly so," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "And you, Mr. Northwood?" "More than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. If someone had told me a year ago that buying a convicted thief's contract would lead to the happiest day of my life, I'd have thought them mad. Beatrice laughed. Life has a way of surprising us, it seems. Indeed it does. He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. I have something for you, a wedding gift. Jackson, you didn't need to, I wanted to, he interrupted gently, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a folded document. Here. Beatrice opened it curiously, then gasped as she realized what she was reading. The deed to the ranch. But why read the names, he urged. There, written clearly in legal script, were both their names. Jackson Northwood and Beatrice Zimmerman Northwood, joint owners of the Willow Creek Ranch. You've made this place a home, Jackson said softly. You've worked this land as hard as I have. It's only right that it belongs to both of us, legally and completely. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll build a life with me here, he replied. Say you'll work beside me in good years and bad. Say you'll fill this house with laughter and love for all the days to come. Yes, she whispered, her heart too full for more elaborate words. Yes to all of it. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and they were finally alone, Beatrice stood in the bedroom that was now theirs, watching as Jackson extinguished the lamps one by one until only the soft glow of moonlight illuminated the room. I used to dream of freedom, she said as he came to stand before her. When I was in that jail cell, when I stood on the auction block, even during those first weeks here, freedom was all I wanted. And now, he asked, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Now I understand that true freedom isn't about being bound to nothing. It's about choosing what you're bound to. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady beat beneath her palm. I choose you, Jackson. Every day in freedom and in love, I choose you. His kiss was the beginning of a new chapter, a promise fulfilled, a future unfolding before them as vast and hopeful as the prairie itself. 5 years later, on another perfect May morning, Beatrice sat on the porch swing, watching as Jackson taught their son James, nearly 4, to ride his pony in the corral. Beside her, 2-year-old Sarah played with wooden blocks, her dark hair so like her father's falling in curls around her cherubic face. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. The herd had grown, the fields yielded abundant harvests, and the house had expanded to accommodate their growing family. Miguel still helped with the livestock, now living in a comfortable cabin on the property with his wife and young son. Clara and her family visited regularly, the cousins playing together while the adults enjoyed each other's company. Life wasn't without its challenges. There had been a drought the previous summer that threatened the crops, a particularly harsh winter that claimed some of the herd, and the usual difficulties of raising young children while managing a working ranch. But through it all, their partnership had remained strong, a foundation sturdy enough to weather any storm. "Mama, look at me," James called, sitting proudly atop his pony as Jackson led them around the corral. "I see you, sweetheart. You're doing wonderfully." Beatrice called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. Jackson glanced up at her, his smile as warm as the spring sunshine. 5 years of marriage had etched a few more lines around his eyes, added a touch of silver at his temples. But to Beatrice, he was more handsome than ever, his face now a familiar landscape of the man she loved more deeply with each passing day. As she watched her family, Beatrice reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the desperate young woman sentenced to servitude to the confident ranch wife and mother, she had become a transformation that seemed almost miraculous in retrospect. "Penny for your thoughts," Jackson said, coming up the porch steps after settling James on a wooden horse Miguel had carved for him. He sat beside her on the swing, his arm naturally finding its place around her shoulders. "I was just thinking about how life can change so completely," she replied, leaning into him. "How the worst day of my life led eventually to the best ones." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Any regrets?" Beatrice looked around at their home, their children, the life they'd built together. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "Good," he said, his voice holding a hint of mischief. "Because I was thinking it might be time to add to our family again. If you're willing, of course." She laughed, turning to face him. "Mr. Northwood, are you attempting to seduce your wife in broad daylight with your children present?" "I would never," he protested, though his eyes danced with humor. "I'm merely discussing family planning in a perfectly respectable manner." "Of course you are." She leaned forward to kiss him lightly. "And I might be amenable to such discussions, particularly later this evening when the children are asleep." His slow smile promised everything she could hope for. "I'll look forward to it, Mrs. Northwood." As the day unfolded around them, James now playing with his sister, the horses grazing in the pasture, the sounds of a working ranch creating a familiar symphony, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Once sold as punishment, she had found not just mercy but love, purpose, and a future brighter than she could have imagined. In Jackson's arms, she had discovered the truth of what it meant to be truly free, not the absence of bonds, but the joy of bonds freely chosen and lovingly maintained. And that, she reflected as Jackson's hand found hers in the gentle rhythm of the porch swing, was the greatest blessing of all.